The Arab League was established in 1945 in Cairo, Egypt, in response to the growing need for political cooperation among the Arab states, which were still struggling to assert their independence and sovereignty in a world heavily influenced by colonial powers. The initial members of the Arab League were Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and Yemen. These countries were bound by common language, history, and culture, and the League's formation was seen as an effort to solidify their autonomy in a rapidly changing global environment. In the years following World War II, many nations around the world, especially in Africa and Asia, were struggling with the legacy of colonialism and the influence of global powers such as the United States and the Soviet Union. The Arab world was no exception. Several Arab nations were still under European control, or their independence was only recently achieved. As a result, there was a shared desire among these nations to form a unified front that would allow them to pursue collective interests, address regional challenges, and push back against the influence of external powers. This was particularly important in a post-World War II world where new global superpowers were asserting their influence, and the risk of being drawn into ideological conflicts such as the Cold War seemed imminent. The founding of the Arab League was part of this broader trend of post-colonial cooperation. At its core, the League was built on the principle of mutual respect for the sovereignty of its member states. While the League's charter emphasized the importance of collaboration in areas such as economic development, political unity, and cultural preservation, it was also clear that each member country would retain its independence. The idea was not to create a federal union like the European Union, but rather to create an organization that would provide a platform for dialogue and cooperation on issues of common concern. The Arab League's charter outlined its primary objectives, including the promotion of political cooperation, the protection of member states' sovereignty, the fostering of economic ties, and the defense of Arab culture and heritage. It aimed to create a unified voice for the Arab world in international diplomacy and promote cooperation between its members to enhance their collective security, stability, and economic growth. However, the Charter also made it clear that the League was not intended to interfere in the domestic affairs of its members, recognizing that political, social, and economic systems across the Arab world were diverse. The early years of the Arab League were marked by several significant challenges. While the founding members shared common goals, they also had distinct political and economic systems, and their relationships with one another were often shaped by personal rivalries, territorial disputes, and differing ideological perspectives. In the first few decades, the Arab League struggled to make significant strides in achieving its broader goals. Many of the early efforts to promote economic integration, for example, were hampered by the reluctance of individual states to relinquish control over key sectors of their economies or open their borders to greater trade and investment. Moreover, the Arab world was also navigating the complex geopolitical landscape of the Cold War. While the Arab League sought to maintain unity, many of its member states were also aligned with one of the two superpowers, the United States or the Soviet Union. This complicated the League's efforts to adopt a common foreign policy or take collective action on international issues. For example, Egypt, under President Gamal Abdel Nasser, was a leading proponent of Arab nationalism and pan-Arab unity. He sought to align the Arab League with a broader movement for independence and social justice, which he saw as a way of challenging Western hegemony and Soviet domination. Meanwhile, other members of the League were more aligned with Western powers, particularly in terms of military and economic cooperation. One of the early successes of the Arab League was its role in the creation of the Arab League Educational, Cultural, and Scientific Organization, ALECSO, in 1970. This organization sought to promote cultural exchanges, preserve Arab heritage, and develop educational programs throughout the region. In addition, the Arab League began to focus on economic cooperation, with the creation of initiatives such as the Arab Common Market, which aimed to reduce trade barriers and foster greater economic integration. However, the Arab League's efforts to achieve political unity were often stymied by divisions among its members. Throughout the 1950s and 1960s, tensions flared between countries such as Egypt and Saudi Arabia, which had different approaches to regional leadership. These tensions were not only driven by ideological differences but also by personal rivalries between leaders like Nasser and King Saud of Saudi Arabia, who competed for influence in the Arab world. As more countries gained independence in the decades following World War II, they sought to join the Arab League to strengthen their political and economic positions. By the 1950s and 1960s, a significant number of North African countries, including Morocco, Tunisia, and Algeria, joined the League, adding their voices to the broader pan-Arab cause. The 1970s saw even further expansion, as Gulf states like Bahrain, Qatar, the UAE, and Oman became members after gaining independence from British colonial influence. However, despite this expansion, the Arab League's ability to take coordinated action remained limited. One of the most significant challenges the League faced was its inability to resolve the ongoing conflict between Israel and Palestine. The Arab-Israeli conflict remained a central issue throughout the League's history, and the organization was often divided over how to best address it. Some members, like Egypt, were open to peace negotiations, while others, such as Syria and Iraq, were more resistant to engaging with Israel. The Arab League's influence also began to decline in the 1970s and 1980s as regional tensions grew. The League was unable to effectively address the rise of political Islam, the emergence of new nationalist movements, and the escalating conflicts between member states. The most significant example of this division was the 1979 expulsion of Egypt from the Arab League after it signed a peace treaty with Israel, which was seen by many Arab states as a betrayal of the Palestinian cause. It wasn't until 1989 that Egypt was readmitted to the League, which reflected the changing political dynamics of the region in the post-Cold War era. Despite these internal challenges, the Arab League has remained a central institution in the Middle East and North Africa. The League has served as a platform for Arab countries to voice their collective interests and coordinate responses to regional challenges. Over time, the League has focused more on economic integration, such as the establishment of the Greater Arab Free Trade Area, GAFTA, in 1997, which aimed to eliminate tariffs and foster greater trade between member states. In recent years, the Arab League has been criticized for its inability to address conflicts within its own ranks. The Syrian civil war, which began in 2011, exposed the League's limitations in dealing with internal conflicts. The Syrian government, led by President Bashar al-Assad, faced opposition from a coalition of rebel groups, many of which were supported by foreign powers. The Arab League was divided on how to handle the conflict, with some member states, such as Saudi Arabia and Qatar, supporting the opposition, while others, including Iraq and Lebanon, maintained their support for Assad's regime. The League's failure to take a unified stance on Syria was emblematic of the broader challenges facing the organization, which has struggled to address internal divisions and take meaningful action in times of crisis. The Arab Spring uprisings of the early 2010s further highlighted the difficulties the League faced in maintaining unity. The uprisings, which began in Tunisia and spread across the Arab world, led to the overthrow of several long-standing autocratic regimes. While the Arab League initially supported the aspirations of the protesters, it soon found itself divided over how to handle the political transitions in countries like Egypt, Libya, and Syria. In Libya, for example, the League called for international intervention to protect civilians from the regime of Muammar Gaddafi. In contrast, the League's response to the Egyptian military's ousting of President Mohamed Morsi was more muted, with some members expressing support for the coup, while others called for a return to democratic rule. Despite these challenges, the Arab League has continued to evolve and adapt to new realities. The organization has taken on a more prominent role in regional diplomacy, particularly in efforts to address conflicts such as the Israeli-Palestinian issue and the rise of extremism and terrorism in the region. The League has called for a two-state solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which remains one of the central goals of the organization. It has also been involved in regional peacekeeping missions, such as those in Lebanon and Sudan, and has supported efforts to combat terrorism and the spread of extremist ideologies. The future of the Arab League will depend on its ability to overcome the internal divisions that have long plagued the organization. New challenges, such as climate change, economic diversification, technological advancement, and the increasing influence of global powers like China, will require the League to find new ways to cooperate and adapt to the changing geopolitical environment. In particular, the economic challenges facing many Arab states, including high unemployment rates, rising poverty, and the dependence on oil exports, will require greater coordination and collaboration. In conclusion, while the Arab League has faced numerous challenges in its pursuit of unity and collective action, it remains an important institution for the Arab world. Its ability to adapt to the changing political, economic, and social realities of the 21st century will determine its relevance and effectiveness in shaping the future of the Middle East and North Africa.